Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a United States Marine Corps Scout sniper range. This isn't a county fair. We don't let civilians, we don't let civilians handle a $12,000 M210 enhanced sniper rifle. The snickers that followed Gunnery Sergeant Evans' words were quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the oppressive heat shimmering over the asphalt. The young Marines, lean and confident in their digital camouflage, tried to hide their amusement behind gloved hands and feigned adjustments to their gear, but their eyes gave them away. They saw what their instructor saw: a woman in her late 40s, dressed in faded jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, with laugh lines around her eyes and a purse slung over her shoulder. She looked like a mom. She looked like their mom, which made the gunny's public condescension all the more biting. The woman, Sarah Morgan, offered no reaction. Her face remained a placid lake, betraying no ripple of anger or embarrassment. She simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, her gaze drifting past the arrogant instructor, past the line of elite marksmen, to the distant, sun-bleached hills where the targets, impossibly small, danced in the mirage. Her son, a brand-new private first class fresh out of boot camp, felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. This was a special Family Day demonstration at Camp Pendleton, a chance for the brass to watch the best of the best, and he had been so proud to show his mother this world. Now, he just wanted the earth to swallow him whole. But high above, in the observation tower, Colonel Matthews lowered his binoculars. He wasn't looking at the struggling snipers or listening to Evans' pompous lecture. He was looking at the woman. He watched the way her feet were planted, shoulder-width apart, a perfectly balanced foundation. He saw how her eyes weren't just looking at the target area, but scanning the entire valley, reading the invisible rivers of wind flowing through the canyons, noting the subtle dance of heat haze. It was a stance of profound, instinctual understanding, a posture he hadn't seen in 20 years, not since a dusty range in Quantico where a young prodigy had rewritten every record in the book. A ghost of a memory stirred. If you believe respect is earned in the silence of action, not the noise of assumption, type earned below. Gunnery Sergeant Evans, basking in the perceived rightness of his authority, continued his impromptu lecture, his voice booming with the artificial confidence of a man who knows the textbook but has forgotten the lesson. You see, ma'am, what these Marines are dealing with today is what we call a problem. We're at 1,200 yards. The wind is a swirling vortex, coming off the hills at a 30-degree angle, gusting from 10 to 20 miles per hour. You have to calculate for windage, for elevation, for spin drift, for the Coriolis effect. That's the rotation of the Earth, for your information. It's not pointing and shooting. It's a science, an art form that takes years of pain and discipline to even begin to comprehend. He gestured to his men, who were visibly struggling. Shot after shot cracked through the air, followed by the dispiriting call from the spotters. Mississippi left. 2 mils, Mississippi high. 1 mil. The atmosphere on the range grew thick with frustration. These were not recruits. They were the apex predators of the Marine Corps, men who could hit a playing card at half a mile. But today, the wind was a malevolent, invisible enemy, a ghost that toyed with their calculations and pushed their million-dollar rounds harmlessly into the dirt. Evans' face, tanned and weathered, began to flush a deep red. The failure of his team was a direct reflection on him, especially with the colonel watching. He needed a target for his own mounting failure, and the quiet woman was the perfect receptacle. He turned his condescension back to her, a tool to deflect from his squad's inability to perform. Meanwhile, Sarah Morgan remained an island of calm in a sea of rising tension. Her breathing was slow, deliberate, a silent metronome counting a rhythm only she could hear. She saw the flags on the range, the obvious indicators, but her focus was elsewhere. She watched a plastic bag caught on a distant cactus, noting its frantic, unpredictable whip. She saw a swirl of dust lift near the target berm, a tiny cyclone that told her the wind was not just pushing left, but also dropping. Her son tugged at her sleeve, his whisper urgent. "Mom, let's just go. Please." She placed a hand on his forearm, a simple, grounding touch that conveyed a universe of meaning. It said, "Be still. Watch. Learn." The silence that followed the final, failed shot was heavier than the heat itself. The demonstration was over. It was an embarrassment. In the ringing silence, a voice emerged, soft yet clear, cutting through the stagnant air of failure. "May I?" 2 words. That was all. They were not a plea, but a simple, technical question. Gunnery Sergeant Evans, who had been about to launch into a final, face-saving tirade about impossible conditions, stopped cold. He turned, a look of sheer disbelief on his face. He actually laughed, a harsh, barking sound devoid of any real humor. It was the laugh of a man who had just been handed a gift-wrapped opportunity to cement his own superiority by orchestrating a civilian's utter humiliation. "What was that?" he asked, feigning confusion. "You want to shoot?" He spread his arms wide, a gesture of mock generosity to the crowd of tense Marines. "By all means, ma'am. Be my guest. Step right up. Show these highly trained scout snipers how the professionals do it." The sarcasm was a tangible thing, thick and oily. He was going to make an example of her. As Sarah Morgan moved toward the firing line, the Marines parted instinctively, a silent, uncertain corridor of men. Their faces were a mixture of pity for her and scorn for the position she had put herself in. They expected her to fumble with the rifle, to need help positioning the bipod, to be intimidated by the violent recoil. They were preparing to witness a farce. But what they saw was a ceremony. She didn't just grab the rifle. She greeted it like an old friend. Her movements were fluid, economical, and imbued with a quiet reverence. Her hands, which had looked like ordinary mother's hands just moments before, now seemed like precision instruments. One hand steadied the stock while the other performed a swift, practice check of the scope mounts, the bolt, the magazine seating. Her thumb ran along the cold steel of the barrel with a familiarity that spoke of 1,000 hours spent in just such a position. She ignored the advanced Kestrel wind meter and the digital ballistic calculator lying next to the mat. Instead, in a gesture that baffled the younger Marines, she gently pulled a single, almost invisible strand of white thread from the cuff of her t-shirt. She held it up, letting it dangle from her fingertips, and for a long moment, she just watched it dance, a living needle on a compass of air. Then, she lay down, not collapsing onto the mat, but sinking into it, her body conforming to the earth until she seemed a part of the landscape itself. The massive rifle, a beast of steel and glass, settled into the pocket of her shoulder as if it had been forged for her. It was not a tool in her hands. It was a completion of her. The world for Sarah Morgan shrank to the perfect, luminous circle of the rifle scope. The chatter, the shuffling feet of the onlookers, the oppressive sun on her back, it all faded into a distant, irrelevant hum. There was only the breathing, the crosshairs, and the target. The reticle, a delicate web of black lines, was preternaturally steady, hovering over the distant steel plate. To the other shooters, the mirage had been a boiling, distorting curse. To Sarah, it was a language. She read the waves of heat, seeing how they bent the light, and factored their subtle lies into her calculations. Her internal calculus was not a frantic series of numbers punched into a device. It was a symphony of sensory input, a lifetime of experience distilled into a single, crystalline moment of knowing. She felt the light pressure of the wind on her right cheek, a different current from the one indicated by the range flags 100 yards out. She saw the dust devil near the target spin clockwise, a clear sign of a downdraft. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that the bullet's path would not be a simple arc, but a complex, winding journey through a river of invisible forces. Her entire being focused on the rhythm of her own body. Inhale, the crosshairs dipping slightly. Exhale, they rose back to center. And then, the pause. The sacred, silent space between heartbeats where the body is perfectly still, a moment of absolute tranquility. In that moment, her finger, which had been resting on the trigger, applied a slow, steady pressure. There was no jerk, no anticipation. Just a clean, deliberate break. The crack of the M210 was shockingly loud in the tense silence, a violent punctuation to her quiet meditation. The recoil was immense, a physical jolt that would have rattled an unprepared shooter, but her body absorbed it seamlessly, her eye never leaving the scope, already watching the vapor trail of the bullet's flight. Then came the second silence, a vacuum of anticipation more profound than the first. Every eye, every binocular, every spotting scope was locked on the distant target. The flight time of the bullet seemed to stretch into an eternity. 1 second, 2 seconds, and then, from the speakers connected to the spotter's radio, a sound that was impossible. A clear, resonant ping of lead striking steel, followed by the spotter's voice, choked with utter disbelief. Impact. Dead center. I repeat. Holy God. Impact. Dead center of the plate. A collective, audible gasp swept through the line of Marines. Heads swiveled from the spotting scopes to the unassuming woman, now calmly cycling the bolt to eject the spent casing. Gunnery Sergeant Evans stood frozen, his face a mask of shattered reality. His jaw hung slack, his eyes wide with a confusion so profound it bordered on fear. His entire worldview, his carefully constructed hierarchy of competence, had been demolished by a single, perfect shot. No, he whispered, the word a hollow puff of air. No way. That's not possible. A fluke. It was a 1 in a million fluke. As the shockwave of disbelief rolled across the range, a new presence made itself known. Colonel Matthews was descending the metal steps of the observation tower, his movements measured and deliberate. He didn't stride. He processed, each step landing with the quiet authority of a man who had seen enough battles to recognize the moment a legend is born. The Marines, including a still stammering Gunnery Sergeant Evans, parted before him, their awe and confusion palpable. The colonel's eyes were fixed on one person alone. He walked directly to Sarah Morgan, who had already risen from the mat and was now meticulously wiping down the rifle with a small cloth she'd produced from her pocket, treating the weapon with a gentle, practiced care that bordered on reverence. He ignored Evans completely, as if the loud, arrogant instructor had ceased to exist. For a moment, the colonel just stood there, his gaze moving from Sarah's calm face to the rifle in her hands. His eyes narrowed, focusing on a small, faded mark burned into the walnut stock, just below the receiver. It was a symbol he recognized with a jolt that went straight to his core, a stylized letter M, encircled by a serpent eating its own tail. The unofficial emblem of a unit that wasn't supposed to exist for a program that had been officially denied for decades. His voice was low, directed only to his aide who had hurried to his side. Give me the service file for a Morgan, Sarah. Full name pending. Authorization code is Alpha 79er. The aide, a young captain, looked confused. Sir, we don't have civilians in the system, do it, the colonel commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The captain fumbled with his encrypted tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. A few seconds later, his eyes went wide. He held the tablet out to the colonel, his hand trembling slightly. Colonel Matthews took the device, and the narrator's voice seemed to echo his thoughts, turning classified data into a litany of honor. Name, Morgan, Sarah K. Call sign, Ghost, last billet. Chief Instructor, Methods of Advanced Marksmanship, Scout Sniper School, Quantico. Notable records. Unclassified record holder for high-angle engagement, 2,450 meters, Helmand Province. Classified record redacted. Awards and commendations. Navy Cross with 1 gold star. Silver Star. Bronze Star with V for Valor. Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Service history attached to. Redacted. Mission profile. Tier 1 Special Operations. Status. Honorably discharged. The words on the screen were more than a biography. They were the secret history of a warrior who had walked in the shadows, a master artisan of a deadly craft. Colonel Matthews slowly lifted his head, his eyes meeting Sarah's. The look that passed between them was one of profound, shared understanding, a silent communication between two professionals who had seen the true face of conflict. In that moment, he was not a base commander and she was not a civilian mother. They were simply two warriors, equals in a fraternity defined not by rank, but by sacrifice. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, his posture shifting from that of an observer to a soldier rendering honors. He brought his hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to cut the air. It was not the perfunctory gesture owed to a superior officer. It was the deep, instinctual salute of a man acknowledging true greatness, a living legend. "Ma'am," he said, his voice resonating with a respect that silenced every other sound on the range. "It is an honor to have you on my range." The word ma'am was a thunderclap. It recontextualized everything. It was not a term for a civilian woman. It was the highest form of address, a signifier of her earned, undeniable mastery. Then, the colonel turned, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the snipers and landing, with the force of a physical blow, on Gunnery Sergeant Evans. His voice dropped, becoming cold and hard as forged steel. Let this moment be seared into your memory. This is a lesson in the mortal danger of assumption. You looked at this woman and you saw a civilian. You saw a mom. Your arrogance and your prejudice blinded you. You assumed competence comes in one shape, one gender, one age. You assumed a warrior wears a uniform. Today, your assumptions made a fool of you, and they dishonored this corps. He let the words hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. Today, you were humbled by Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Ghost Morgan, retired. The woman who not only wrote the doctrine on high-angle shooting you all failed to execute today, but who perfected it in places you will only ever read about in classified reports. You are dismissed. Evans stood, utterly broken, the color drained from his face. Sarah, her work done, simply offered the colonel a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "Colonel," she said, her voice as calm and steady as the hands that had just made the impossible shot. She had proven her point not with words, but with a single, undeniable act of perfect competence. The story of the shot spread through Camp Pendleton not like wildfire, but like the shockwave from a high-yield detonation. It traveled from the mouths of the awestruck snipers to the whispers in the barracks, from the gossip in the mess hall to the hushed, reverent tones in the officers' club. By nightfall, every Marine on base knew the tale of the unassuming vet mom who had silenced the range's loudest mouth with a single round. The legend of Morgan's shot was born. As with all legends, the details began to grow with each telling. The 1,200-yard target became a mile. The gusting wind became a Category 3 hurricane. The M210 became a standard-issue rifle she'd never seen before. But the core of the story, the immutable truth, remained. The quietest person on the range had proven to be the most dangerous, and respect was a currency earned only through action. The most profound transformation, however, occurred in Gunnery Sergeant Evans. The public evisceration by Colonel Matthews had shattered his pride, but in its place, something new and more valuable began to grow: humility. A few days later, he found Sarah's son, PFC Morgan, during morning formation. There was no swagger in his step, no arrogance in his voice. He looked the young Marine in the eye and spoke with a quiet sincerity that was more powerful than any of his previous bellows. "Private," he began, "I need you to deliver a message to your mother. First, tell her I offer my deepest, most sincere apology for my conduct. It was unprofessional and inexcusable." He paused, swallowing his pride. "Second, could you ask her what I was teaching wrong about reading the wind? I need to know. We need to know." It was a confession of ignorance, a plea for knowledge from a student to a master. When PFC Morgan relayed the message that evening, Sarah simply smiled. She took a small notepad and wrote down a few words, handing the paper to her son. The note read, "Gunny, you told them to fight the wind. You can't. You told them to calculate it. You can't, not really. Tell them to stop fighting and start listening. The wind is not the enemy. It's a messenger. It tells you everything you need to know about the journey the bullet must take. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." The legacy of that day began to solidify in small, symbolic ways. One of the young snipers, on his own initiative, policed the range until he found the single, gleaming brass casing ejected from the M210 after Sarah's shot. He spent hours polishing it to a mirror shine. He then mounted it on a small, dark-grained piece of mahogany he scavenged from the woodshop. Beneath the casing, he affixed a small, engraved brass plate. It didn't list her name or rank. It simply said, "The Morgan shot. Listen." He placed it on the mantel in the Scout sniper-ready room, a place of honor amidst memorabilia from legends past. It became a new icon, a holy relic of humility. The firing position she had used, Lane 4, also underwent a transformation. It was never officially renamed, but no one called it Lane 4 anymore. It became, simply, the Morgan Line. Instructors would bring new students there, not just to practice, but to learn the deeper lesson of that day. Standing on that spot became a ritual, a silent acknowledgement that the most critical element in marksmanship wasn't the eye or the finger, but the mind. It was a physical reminder to strip away all prejudice, all assumption, and to see the world, and the people in it, for what they truly were. Through all of this, Sarah Morgan remained unchanged. Her son, bursting with a pride so immense it seemed to radiate from him, told her she was a hero, a legend being spoken about all over the base. She simply shrugged, a small, wry smile on her face as she packed his lunch for the following day. "I'm not a hero," she told him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I just wanted you to see, and for them to remember, that character isn't what you say you are. It's what you prove you can do, especially when no one in the world thinks you're qualified." Her legacy was not the impossible shot, but the philosophy that guided it, a quiet, unshakable belief in competence over clamor, in action over assertion. It was a lesson her son, and an entire generation of Marines, would carry with them for the rest of their lives. A year later, the sun beat down on the same range at Camp Pendleton. A new class of aspiring scout snipers lay prone on the mats, their faces etched with concentration. The wind was up again, a familiar, mischievous presence, confounding their calculations. The lead instructor moved down the line, his voice calm and measured, offering quiet corrections, not loud condemnations. It was Gunnery Sergeant Evans, but he was a man remade. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a deep, thoughtful patience. He walked with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced his own ignorance and emerged wiser. He led the new class away from the firing line and gathered them at Lane 4. He pointed not at the distant targets, but at the ground beneath their feet. "This spot we're standing on," he began, his voice imbued with a storyteller's reverence, "is called the Morgan Line. There's no sign, it's not in any official manual, but it's the most important place you will learn from in this entire program." He then told them the story. He did not spare himself, painting a vivid picture of his own hubris, his own blindness. "I looked at a warrior who had forgotten more about ballistics than I will ever know, and I saw a mom. I looked at a living legend, and I saw an unqualified civilian. I let my eyes, my assumptions, my prejudice, deceive me, and she humbled me. She humbled this entire institution with a single, perfect shot." He picked up a rifle from the rack, holding it up for them to see. "This weapon can put a round on a target a mile away. Your scope can see the twitch of a man's eye at 1,000 yards. But if your mind is blind, if you allow your assumptions to build a wall between what you see and what is true, you will always, always miss the target. The most important target is not out there," he said, tapping his own temple. "It's in here." The Morgan Principle had become a cornerstone of his instruction, a foundational lesson in humility and open-mindedness. The legend was no longer just a story whispered in the barracks. It had become doctrine. It was a moral compass, ensuring that this new generation of warriors understood that strength wore many uniforms, and the most formidable opponent is always one's own prejudice. True legacy is not a name carved into a monument or a list of medals pinned inside a shadow box. It is not a record destined to be broken or a story fated to be forgotten. A true legacy is a lesson that is absorbed into the very marrow of an institution, a truth that continues to breathe and move forward in the actions of others long after its author has left the stage. Sarah Morgan's shot was not an ending. It was the thunderous beginning of a new understanding. It was the sound of a glass ceiling not just cracking, but being vaporized. It was the echo of a profound principle being reestablished in a place that had momentarily forgotten it. Competence is the only currency that matters. Her silence on that day spoke with more eloquence and authority than 1,000 shouted commands. It was a testament to the quiet professional, the one who walks without swagger, who works without praise, and whose worth is measured not in the volume of their voice, but in the precision of their impact. She sought no validation and required no applause. Her competence was her creed, her precision was her argument, and the single, perfect hole in a steel plate 1,000 yards away was her final, irrefutable word on the subject of who she was. That legacy now lives on, not in a file stamped classified, but in the calm, steady hands of a gunnery sergeant teaching his students to close their eyes and listen to the wind, and in the hearts of every young Marine who now knows to look past the surface and recognize the warrior who might be standing quietly, unassuming, right beside them. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.